In a small yet popular store located in a bustling part of town, Jake stood behind the counter, impatiently checking out customers. Jake was in his early 20s, disillusioned by the routine of his job. He had grown accustomed to the endless flow of faces and the monotony of ringing up groceries. To him, his job felt beneath him, and his attitude reflected this. He was quick to judge and often dismissive of customers who didn't meet his standards. The store, though modest in size, catered to a diverse clientele, ranging from affluent professionals to working-class individuals. Jake, however, had his preferences. He treated some customers with warmth and others with disdain, depending on how they looked or what he assumed about them. He believed he knew enough about people from just a glance, often making assumptions based on their appearance alone. It wasn't an unusual trait, perhaps, for someone like him, but it was a toxic one. Over time, this bad habit had become second nature, and it fueled his growing dissatisfaction with his life. Jake was someone who, by all appearances, should have been content. He had a steady job, lived in a decent neighborhood, and though he wasn't wealthy, he didn't struggle the way many did. But instead of feeling grateful, Jake spent most of his days bitter. He believed he deserved more respect, more money, more recognition. This sense of entitlement had turned him into someone who didn't care much about others, especially those who didn't fit into his narrow worldview. As the morning rush hour began, a new customer entered the store. Monica, a composed and confident black woman, walked in with purpose. Her movements were deliberate, and though she carried herself with quiet dignity, she didn't seek attention. She dressed in a simple yet elegant way, her demeanor reflecting a sense of calm and authority. But to Jake, she was just another face in the crowd, someone who, in his eyes, didn't look like the kind of person who belonged in this store. To Jake, Monica was different, but not in a way that earned his respect. He had already made up his mind about her the moment she stepped through the door. She was, he assumed, one of those people. The kind of person who didn't belong here, who couldn't possibly afford anything in this store, or worse, someone who would cause trouble or be difficult for him to deal with. In Jake's mind, people like her were an inconvenience, someone who was sure to take up more of his time and energy than they were worth. As Monica browsed the aisles, Jake continued to glance at her out of the corner of his eye, his assumptions forming quickly. His face tightened with disdain as he observed her, mentally placing her in the category of customers he believed were beneath his respect. His disdain wasn't subtle either. He scowled openly, hoping she would see his expression and get the message that she wasn't welcome. When Monica finally approached the counter with her items, Jake's disinterest was palpable. Without even looking at her properly, he muttered under his breath, "What do you want?" His tone was sharp, cold, as though she were inconveniencing him by being there. His fingers tapped impatiently on the counter, eyes flicking dismissively to the clock on the wall behind her. He didn't care what she bought or why she was there. He just wanted her gone. Monica, unfazed by his attitude, politely began to place her items on the counter. Jake, however, didn't bother to acknowledge her presence beyond the minimum effort required. He scanned her items with impatience, his fingers drumming on the counter as if he couldn't wait to get her out of the store. His hands moved quickly, deliberately, slamming each item down a little harder than necessary, a silent protest to her presence. That's when Jake made his first mistake. As he scanned the last item, Jake smirked, a sneer curling his lips. "Are you sure you can afford this?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. The comment was unprovoked, but it was clear that Jake's prejudice had already colored his perception of Monica. He eyed her as though she didn't belong in the store, his gaze cold and judgmental. Monica paused, her hands still resting lightly on the counter. She looked up at Jake, her expression calm but firm. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone measured, refusing to be rattled by his insult. Jake shrugged, his smirk widening as he folded his arms across his chest. "You know, we have certain customers who shop here," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "I just don't want to waste my time if you're not one of them." His eyes flicked dismissively over her appearance, and it was clear that in his mind, He had already decided who Monica was and what she was worth. The silence in the store grew thick, as a few other customers in the line began to notice the exchange. Monica remained calm, her gaze steady on Jake, but there was a shift in the air, a tension building as the weight of Jake's prejudice became clearer. A few customers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of the situation. No one dared to speak up, but the discomfort in the room was palpable. Monica, still composed, met Jake's gaze evenly. "I'm sure I can handle it," she replied quietly, but her voice carried a strength that made even Jake hesitate for a moment. Yet, his arrogance pushed him forward. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms tighter, as if to assert his imagined superiority. "Look, if you're going to waste my time, you can take this somewhere else. I don't have time for—" Jake didn't finish his sentence, but his meaning was clear. He was judging her, assuming she wasn't worthy of the store, of his time, or of respect. Monica's calm composure didn't waver. Instead, she gave a small nod, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. Without saying another word, she handed Jake the payment, collected her items, and left the store. Jake barely noticed her departure, convinced he had asserted his dominance over yet another customer he deemed inferior. As she walked out, Jake shook his head, muttering something under his breath as the next customer approached. He felt victorious, as if he had rid the store of someone who didn't belong. He took pride in his actions, as if he had done something to protect the store's image, unaware of the irony and ignorance that had defined his behavior. Little did Jake know, this was not the last he would see of Monica. The woman he had dismissed with arrogance and disrespect wasn't just any customer. She was the owner of the very store he worked in, and soon enough, Jake would learn the consequences of his prejudice in a way that would change everything. The next day, the atmosphere in the store was tense. Jake arrived for his shift, completely unaware that anything had changed. He strolled in as usual, indifferent to the customers and co-workers around him. As he clocked in, he noticed something odd, a buzz of whispers among the staff, more alertness in their faces than usual. Jake shrugged it off, assuming it had nothing to do with him. But then, as the store manager gathered the employees for a quick meeting, Jake noticed something that made him pause. There, standing next to the manager, was Monica, the very same woman he had insulted the day before. Her calm composure was the same, but now there was a quiet authority about her that Jake couldn't quite place. The manager began to speak, but Jake barely registered the words at first. His mind was racing, trying to piece together why Monica was there, standing at the front of the group as if she belonged there. The manager's voice eventually cut through Jake's confusion. "I'd like to introduce you all to Monica Lewis," the manager said, gesturing toward her with a respectful nod. "She's the owner of this store." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He blinked, his mind reeling. Owner. The word echoed in his head, but he struggled to process it. The woman he had humiliated, dismissed, and insulted was the owner. His stomach churned with a sickening realization. Monica was watching him now, her eyes calm but penetrating, as if waiting for him to fully understand the weight of his actions. The manager continued, unaware of Jake's internal turmoil. "Monica has recently taken over from her late father, who originally built this store," he explained. "She's here today to observe the team and see how things are running." Jake felt his legs weaken slightly, but he kept his stance, forcing himself to breathe. His mouth went dry as the weight of his mistake settled on him. He had been arrogant, cruel, and dismissive to his boss, the very person who had the power to determine his future in the store. Jake's mind raced, searching for a way out of the mess he had created, but no words came to him. Monica, for her part, remained composed. She greeted the other employees warmly, shaking hands and exchanging a few words with them. When she reached Jake, she paused for a moment. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he waited, expecting a confrontation or reprimand. Instead, Monica simply extended her hand, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "Jake," she said, her voice steady and controlled, "it's good to meet you formally." Jake hesitated, his guilt swelling. But he took her hand, the grip of her handshake firm yet gentle. He began, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? Sorry didn't feel nearly enough for what he had done, but Monica didn't linger. She moved on, continuing to greet the rest of the team, leaving Jake standing there, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath him. The meeting ended, and the employees returned to their duties, but Jake remained stuck in place for a moment, paralyzed by shame. His thoughts spiraled. He knew he had to face Monica properly, apologize, beg for forgiveness, but the idea filled him with dread. How could he even begin to undo what he had done? For the rest of the day, Jake could barely focus on his work. Every time Monica walked past, his heart thudded painfully in his chest. He caught glimpses of her speaking to the manager, observing the staff, and interacting with the customers. Always calm, always professional. She carried herself with the grace he had failed to notice the day before, and it only deepened his guilt. As the hours dragged on, Jake's mind replayed their previous encounter in excruciating detail. He remembered the way he had looked at her, judgmental, dismissive, and the way he had spoken, with arrogance and entitlement. He had assumed so much about her, never bothering to consider her as anything more than what his prejudice told him she was. Now, every time Monica entered his line of sight, he was reminded of his mistake. The shame gnawed at him, making it difficult to meet her gaze, though she never once seemed angry or vengeful. That, perhaps, was the worst part, the fact that Monica had every right to demand consequences for his actions, yet she carried on without holding it over him. By the end of his shift, Jake could no longer avoid the truth. He had to apologize, not because he feared for his job, but because the weight of his guilt was becoming unbearable. He couldn't live with himself if he didn't make things right, or at least try to. As the store began to quiet down, and most of the employees clocked out, Jake noticed Monica standing near the front, speaking with the manager one last time. His stomach twisted, but he knew he couldn't wait any longer. Swallowing his nerves, he walked toward her, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Monica?" he said quietly, stopping a few feet away. His voice was shaky, a far cry from the arrogance he had shown the day before. Monica turned to him, her expression calm but curious. She didn't say anything, but the silence that stretched between them was enough to force Jake to speak. I need to apologize," he stammered, his face flushing with shame, "for the way I treated you yesterday. I didn't know who you were, but that doesn't excuse it. I was rude, and I shouldn't have been. I'm really truly sorry." Monica regarded him quietly, letting his words hang in the air for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice as composed as ever. "Thank you, Jake," she said. "It's important to own up to your mistakes, but this isn't about who I am. It's about how we treat people, regardless of their title or position." Jake felt his chest tighten. She was right, of course. It wasn't just about her being the owner. It was about the prejudice that had led him to treat her that way in the first place. I've never thought about it like that," he admitted. "But I can see it now. I've been wrong." Monica gave him a small, understanding smile. "We all have things to learn, Jake," she said. "The important part is what you do with that understanding going forward." Jake nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. Monica had every right to be furious with him, but instead she had shown him grace. It was more than he deserved, but it gave him the push he needed to change. After his conversation with Monica, Jake felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just the shame of his past behavior that drove him to change, it was the desire to make things right, not just with Monica, but with everyone who walked into the store. He realized that his job wasn't just about ringing up purchases. It was about interacting with people from all walks of life, and each one of them deserved respect. The next day, Jake came to work with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just doing his job anymore, he was actively working to be better. He greeted every customer with a genuine smile and started taking the time to engage respectfully with every person who walked through the door, regardless of their appearance or background. The change didn't go unnoticed. His co-workers were quick to pick up on the shift in his attitude. They had seen how Jake had handled customers before, often with impatience or arrogance, but now he was different. He was more present, more considerate. Some of his colleagues teased him for his sudden change of heart, but Jake didn't mind. The truth was, he knew he had a long way to go, but he felt good about making the effort. Customers, too, began to respond differently. Where there had once been tension, there was now a sense of ease. Jake started to receive more smiles, more friendly exchanges, and even the occasional compliment for his improved service. He realized how much he had missed out on by shutting himself off from people, by treating them as mere inconveniences instead of human beings with stories of their own. Inspired by Monica's example, he asked the manager if he could get involved in some of the community outreach programs the store supported. He began volunteering for events that helped underprivileged families and children, something he never would have thought of doing before. Each time, he felt like he was not only giving back to the community, but also making up for the harm his previous mindset had caused. His co-workers were curious about the change, and some even asked him about it. "What's gotten into you, Jake?" one of them asked, half-jokingly. "You're like a different person." Jake smiled, thinking of Monica and her quiet strength. "I just realized that the way I was seeing people wasn't right," he said simply. "Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are." A few months later, the store held a staff event to celebrate the success of a recent community drive that had raised funds for local families in need. Jake had been deeply involved in organizing it, and for the first time he felt a real sense of pride in his work, not because of any praise he received, but because he knew he was contributing to something bigger than himself. At the event, Monica approached Jake with a smile. "I've been hearing a lot of good things about you lately," she said warmly. "It seems like you've really turned things around." Jake's face flushed slightly, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from a sense of accomplishment. "I've been trying," he admitted. "You really made me see things differently, and I'm grateful for that." Monica nodded, her expression filled with pride and understanding. "It takes a lot of courage to change, Jake. I'm proud of the work you've put in." Jake felt a swell of gratitude. "I owe a lot of it to you," he said sincerely. "You could have fired me that day. Honestly, you had every right to, but instead you gave me a chance, and I'll never forget that." Monica smiled softly. "It wasn't about punishment, Jake. It was about growth. We all have the ability to learn and become better. You've proven that." For a moment they stood in comfortable silence, reflecting on how far things had come since their first encounter. Monica's grace and willingness to forgive had not only given Jake a second chance, but had also helped transform him into a better person. That night, after most of the staff had left, Jake found himself sitting in the garden behind the store, reflecting on everything that had happened. The moonlight cast a soft glow over the plants, and he felt a deep sense of peace. Monica had shown him what true strength looked like, not through power or wealth, but through empathy, forgiveness, and the ability to see the good in others. Jake knew he still had a lot to learn, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. He had been given the gift of growth, and he intended to keep walking that path, no matter where it led. As he sat there, gazing up at the stars, he realized that the true reward wasn't in recognition or praise. It was in the connections he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the person he was becoming. And for Jake, that was the real wealth.